Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I uploaded exam results yesterday. Did everybody get a grade and they're able to see it? And you have the right PDF and everything? Okay. So I also uploaded in the files section just the solutions to the exam. And it kind of, obviously, like a lot of the questions don't have a single solution. But it's kind of the baseline of what I was looking for. If you have, overall, we did really well. So a lot of A's, a lot of perfect scores on the exam as well. And none of the questions had a high enough error rate to really be considered problematic. Some of the questions people responded in ways that I didn't intend, but what I tried to do was look at that response and then interpret what kind of question you were answering or what you were trying to explain. In a lot of cases, it was just somebody giving me one concept, still like a valid HCI thing, but just not in the right spot really. So I try to give as much credit as possible. If you have questions or if I did math wrong, which is totally possible, let me know. The best way to do that is to send me an email and just tell me which question number, tell me what's wrong with it, or if you think I didn't understand what you were explaining or something, let me know. I'm more than willing to work with you on that. And because sometimes it is just you wrote something and maybe I didn't read it the right way or something like that. But let me know if you have questions. But overall, we did really well, so that's good. So project presentations. We were planning next week, Tuesday, and potentially some of Thursday, doing our first project checkpoint presentations to FedEx. Yeah.
So the presentation on Tuesday and the sketches we turn in on Thursday, what's the difference?
Okay, yeah. So actually, I'll go over there right now. So I posted this on Canvas a little while ago, I think last week. But there's two different things that we need to do here. So the individual sketches. So what this is every person needs to have 10 unique sketches of something related to your project. Doesn't have to be something that your group ends up using, but just 10 unique sketches. And that should be due on Friday the 22nd before midnight. And so I made it like that so that the group can focus on this. You don't have to worry about this so much. You have a few days to get that. And you can just put it in a PDF and upload it to Canvas. That's the best way to do that. And so that's 5% of your overall project grade. It's just turning in those 10 sketches. So that's really easy to do. Highly encourage you to do that. The other part of it is the group deliverable, which is the presentation itself. And that's what we'll be doing on Tuesday. So FedEx will be remote connected to us. So we'll have them on video call and they'll be able to see the presentation and be able to talk to us. For this, I'm asking that you submit your presentation material, if it's a PowerPoint or a Keynote or whatever it might be. Any files will need to run it by 11 a.m. on Tuesday so that I can get them all on the computer so that we don't waste a lot of time transitioning between groups. If you're using Google Slides or something, if you can send me the URL to that, I'll have that ready to go on here. And obviously, if you submit this and then you realize there's something wrong, please go ahead and send me an update on it. It's fine. Just 11 a.m. is a pretty reasonable time, I think, to get them all assembled. As far as what's in the presentation, so this is the rubric for grading. And obviously you want to say who your team is, which project you're working on for FedEx. And then you do want to give some background about the project problem, but I'll tell you what will happen since a lot of groups are doing the same project. Once the first group has described it, it'll be really horrible for us to sit here and hear like 5 more of the same description. So it is totally fine with me as long as you have a slide that addresses it, if you kind of just breeze over that once it's been described, because FedEx will know what it is, we will know what it is, and it'll give us more time to actually talk back and forth with FedEx. So a description, and then you will want to talk about how your group kind of understands the problem, so what your approach is, if there's anything special or unique about it. This is also where you'd include like any assumptions, which FedEx gave you some assumptions that you could have, but if you have additional ones, you can put them there. And the major part of the project is we want to give them a preliminary design. And so that needs to be something that covers the entire problem that they've posed. So it's usually a set of sketches that walks them through kind of each feature. And you would want to highlight anything that is unique or special, or that you just really like, or that you want their feedback on specifically during that part of the presentation. And so you'll take them through what your solution is, and then if you have any questions for them, or if they have anything for you, you can kind of put that at the end, and then we'll have time for them to talk to you and for us to talk to them. The big thing here is we try our best to keep this to less than 10 minutes per group, because we have 7 groups and we have 75 minutes in class, and we really don't want to go into Thursday too much. If we have to have a couple of groups go over to Thursday, we'll do that. But we want to try to keep it short. And so I think that usually you want to hold on to 2 or 3 minutes for questions specifically, because they'll usually always have 2 or 3 minutes of questions. And I'm not going to penalize you or anything if they have more questions and that kind of thing happens. Try to be as flexible as possible, but we do have really limited time to do this. So these are the kind of the main important points, and then as a group you'll just turn in this presentation. Actually, I'll have it already turned in before this, and so that'll count for your grade for this. As far as the presentation itself and your whole group will probably want to come up here. I don't mind if everyone doesn't speak. You don't have to give everyone their own little part in the presentation if you don't want to. I'll know that everyone contributed from the 10 designs that everybody sends in. And I certainly encourage all of you to ask questions if you have questions, or point out things that are important to you. But it's not essential or required that everyone say something. I'm not going to count off points for that or anything. So within your group, kind of just organize how you would with any presentation. And the main thing is just you want to convey to them what your solution is and how you understand their problem. So there are questions about that.
It was around, for our preliminary design part of the presentation, it's around 2 to 3 photos from each of us with our take, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to do it usually. And that's kind of how it usually works out, is that somebody will have a couple of sketches or mock-ups for a certain part of it, and somebody will have some for the other, and then you kind of just put them all together. If it turns out that you really like the style of one person's sketches or something and you want them to do it all consistently, that's fine too. Whatever you want to do, it's totally up to you. But but yeah, generally you'll just have a sequence of sketches. Other questions? So for the sketches themselves, you've witnessed the horribleness of this projector already this semester. So try your best. If they're paper sketches and you're taking pictures of them or scanning them or whatever, try to make sure that they're big enough, that there's enough contrast for presenting it here. And I'll once you turn them in, I will send them a copy of your presentation so they have a local copy of it, because the WebEx thing is not going to look beautiful either. But just remember that details only show up to a certain degree here. All right. So if you have questions before then, email me or come find me or whatever. But we'll plan for Tuesday to be presentations. Also, you can dress however you want for this. I don't particularly think it's necessary to dress up or anything in a special way for this presentation. Maybe when we do the final one, I'd encourage you to kind of look nice-ish. I'm not big on the whole dress up to present kind of thing. I think if you do a good job with your interfaces and you're clear communicating, that's what really matters. Obviously, that's different in the real world, so don't take it to heart too much. Okay, so today is a very special day because it is Valentine's Day, and so we will be doing a little bit of a special topic. This falls within social HCI, so we're going to talk about love in HCI. So this first part of the semester that we've just finished has been kind of the human, their cognition, perception, things about humans, and then a little bit of some design principles. The next section we're going to do is going to be a lot of practical things. So we'll start to look at prototyping tools, software. We'll start to talk about like what actual companies do in terms of their design standards. We'll look at popular, just general design standards like material design, that kind of thing. But the other component of that, while we're doing these practical things, we'll be looking at different aspects of HCI that are kind of beyond just pure perception, just pure performance, and basic design principles. We'll be looking at a lot of HCI that is in the research area, a lot of applications like social things that are happening, and a lot more recent applications. So this will kind of be a preview of that. I'm going to focus on this particular area because how often do you get to do Valentine's Day HCI lecture? So, talking about love in HCI. Previously, we were talking about design principles, and we were looking a lot at cognitive psychology. When we talk about computers and technology and how they interact with people and their interpersonal relationships and how they're used as tools or how they mediate those, we look more at social psychology. And social psychology is a huge field, and its basic premise is to look at humans and how they interact in a social way, why they do that, and to characterize that and build models of that. We won't go too far into the theory, but basically there's what's called the social brain hypothesis, and it's the idea that humans evolved to have this huge amount of their brain dedicated to social actions, and that's a major part of human life. And particularly for us, interpersonal relationships, which can be anything from relationships with family members to friends and acquaintances, through to romantic relationships, which is what we'll focus on today. Something in general that we have to really remember when we talk about social psychology and social aspects of HCI is that culture is a huge differentiator in a lot of these things that we see and a lot of the models that we build. At the highest level, Eastern and Western culture tends to be different when we talk about social psychology and the expectations that we have. And we'll touch on that more as we go. But that does play a huge role in this kind of thing. So thinking about this, kind of to start off with, I want to think about machines, interfaces, computers in two categories. So there's this category of something that's a tool. And you can think of this as just something that helps you get something done, like any tool would. You use a screwdriver to screw something in. You don't really have a social relationship with the screwdriver usually. You don't think of it as being an entity that has desires and beliefs and other relationships in the world. It's just this thing that you're using. On the other side of that, we have social actors. So if you just think of another human that you interact with, we think of them a lot differently than we think about tools. We ascribe some autonomy to them. We understand that they have feelings that are similar to the way we feel about things. We understand they're going to have their own reactions to things. They're going to have their own goals, their own beliefs, desires, and intentions. But what's interesting, and we'll talk about different systems, software, machines that work on both of these levels. So tools, things like a really simple technology, like the telephone, okay? That's a tool that allows people to socially connect and do things that they couldn't previously do. But the telephone itself is more of a medium. It's a means to an end. People don't usually think much about the telephone, and it doesn't, for the most part, influence the social relationships that they're building. Maybe if you've got a phone that's, dropping audio or has some weird compression or something, maybe that contributes to some, unhappiness in that relationship. But in general, something like that is on the side of just being, a pure tool. Most people don't think of it in a social way. So what's interesting with computers, and especially when you move to computers that speak with a human voice and computers that are physically embodied as robots that move around, or virtual avatars, things with faces, the human brain and what we're used to is dealing with social actors. We interact with other people all the time. And there's a whole line of interesting research showing that given a few cues about something, and like a really simple one is to put eyes on something, and if those eyes seem to be tracking things or moving at all, we start to regard that thing more socially, more like we would regard another human. And it's at times really tough to believe that this is the case, but it is. And there's a ton of studies showing this on all kinds of levels. So simple things like you can take a group of people and you can have computers that have like a red or blue label on them, and then give the people armbands that are red or blue. And they will actually form alliances with the machine that has their color, kind of without consciously thinking about it. And that's a really small example, but you can imagine if it's that simple with color, once these machines start to do more and more things, it becomes trickier. I know we mentioned there's a psych study that's really old where basically they had a laser pointer, just moving around on a wall randomly, and then a couple more laser pointers, and then they had people watch it and then explain what happened, and people ascribed personality to the different dots and what they were doing, and one was pursuing the other, all kinds of things that weren't really there. But humans spend a lot of time thinking about stuff like that, so we're pretty quick to ascribe it, if we can. So let's start out with a pretty fundamental topic, I think, in HCI, related to relationships, close relationships, intimate relationships, what we will consider love for Valentine's Day, although that's harder than you think to define scientifically. So we're going to talk about texting and sexting a little bit. So the first thing I present to you, and these are all papers, journal articles, and conference papers. So put the citations down here. You should go read some of them. They're really, really interesting stuff. A lot of this comes from the CHI conference. A lot of this comes from the Journal of Human Computer Behavior. So texting is bad for romantic relationships. This is a kind of one of those topics that is a lively debate among psychologists and HCI researchers. And there is this temptation, I think, I don't know why, but we always see once mainstream news media finds out about some tech-related trend, it is now moral panic and it's the evil, of everything. So Fortnite is going to kill all of our children. It's similar here, and video games are causing violence. But this is an interesting study. So I chose this paper because they did this two-wave design because they were trying to fight the dissent here that texting was not bad. And so they actually did this design where they interviewed people and did all these measures, and they waited a year and did it again. And so they're able to control for a lot of factors. But what this comes down to is that people who are using their devices to text more end up having a lower perceived relationship quality. And specifically, they found, they kind of gave this a redeeming factor here, that this is if people in a romantic relationship tended to use their devices to text when they were physically co-located. And the control, I should say, the two-wave design, because you could argue that, hey, maybe people who are, just texting on their phones when they're physically co-located already don't have a great relationship, and, this is not being, a causal relationship the other way. So that's what that was controlling for. So this is actually showing that, as the phone use increased, the texting increased, and they were texting each other too, I should say. The lack of intimacy grew, and there's a lack of conflicts. So this is kind of a social psych concept called avoidance. Basically, when things are challenging to us in a social sense, one valid strategy is to run away and hide, or to escape. And so they kind of hypothesized that that's the cause of the relationships getting worse. They did find that when people were physically apart and using texting as a medium, that was actually a positive thing. And kind of the most interesting recommendation I thought this paper had was that a lot of these applications that are facilitating text messaging don't have a good enough idea of the state that the user's actually in. And so they suggested that once we can track everything about the user, their emotions and what they're doing, that maybe we can develop messaging apps that help prevent this kind of negative side of texting. So they developed a model of this and everything. You can go look through the paper. They actually do a lot of interviews with people, and so there's a lot of great just quotes and stuff of people talking about their experiences and kind of contributing to this model. So that leads to a natural question. Is sexting good for your relationship if texting is maybe bad for it? And so it turns out that this differs a lot. I should say this is another area that is kind of villainized, and especially when we talk about younger people, adolescents, and sexting. There's just so much research literature just saying, oh, this is horrible and the children are at risk. And I don't want to diminish that. There's definite risk and there are things to worry about, but it's not balanced in terms of looking at possible benefits versus negatives. So we see a gender difference, and then so the kind of the answer here is it depends. And so we looked at types of relationships too. So committed versus casual. So this tends to find that in the committed relationships, regardless of gender, you have better outcomes, whereas in the casual relationships, not so much. And I think in particular, for women in a casual relationship, so it's fewer positive consequences. So this is these two are kind of, you might say, like, why is this HCI at all? Why is this not just social psychology? And the answer to that is that when we look at these systems, they have to be designed by someone. People are using them. They're using them for things like this. And I guess the first step in any HCI problem or designing any software system is understanding the user and what they're doing. And as we go through this, we'll see some more examples that are closer to HCI and kind of closer to the engineering side. But it's important to understand these things. Also, I thought this was interesting, there are some studies on deception in sexting. So people, when they ran this study, they found that people were often kind of doing this sexting stuff, but they're lying about things. Like, oh, I'm wearing this or that, but they're not. They're just laying there watching Netflix or whatever. And so the paper makes some great comparisons to how this plays out face to face with people using deception or kind of faking things that happen in relationships, and talking about if this is healthy or helpful, and kind of the outcome. The main findings are that people frequently, like most of the people, the reason that they would lie or deceive the partner was trying to be nice to the partner, trying to give the partner a pleasant experience. And there were a few that were, self-serving deceptions, but for the most part, it was pretty positive as to why people were doing it. But we really care a lot about, when we talk about people and relationships, kind of what psychologists classify as attachment styles, and this avoidance attachment going on. And so with this, you see that people use this kind of as an avoidance mechanism. So the relationship is not quite as healthy in most cases, or not as likely to succeed or to continue. So some other things about texting. Always like to send a text message, see that it's read, and then there's those little bubbles, and then they just go away, and then they don't respond. It's troubling, right? Like, what's going on? So there are a lot of studies on this, and this is definitely closer to kind of the computer sciencey side of things. Like, we get to make that choice about those bubbles, and if they show up, if they are a good thing or a bad thing, if we let the user have fine-grained control of who gets to see that they read a message, or do we kind of just force them to make everyone see or not see that? And so what this, there's quite a few papers on this kind of thing, but generally what we're looking at with this is that people want to be aware of the context that the person that they're talking to is in, especially in romantic relationships. So these studies find that a lot of relationships where delays and unexpected delays, I should say, are not a problem, are ones where people have taken measures so that the other one knows what's going on. So I share my schedule, my Google Calendar with my fiance, and she shares hers with me. We know kind of what our schedules are for the day. We know that this or that might come up, or that when you're on this part of campus, Wi-Fi and cell connections fight each other and nothing goes through or something. And neither of us has to freak out whenever the other one doesn't respond or something like that. And so they divided this into a few areas, but kind of the design recommendations that come out of this is that if we can enhance understanding and visibility, which was on the exam. So in this case, visibility of who the person you're talking to, your partner, and kind of what their status is, that's helpful. If we can, this was an interesting suggestion. So there's kind of this problem where people don't always know if a conversation is over or not, and kind of their perceptions of that can vary. I know, like for a lot of people, I might just have kind of an ongoing chat with them, and it kind of, at times it's more frequent messages back and forth, and then, we have to go do work or do whatever, and then it just kind of stops and pauses. So they presented this idea for being able to like literally pause a conversation to indicate that, you're away from it, which is interesting, and there's certainly other ways of representing that. And then kind of the last big recommendation is to enable people to send, kind of emergency or important messages. And I think we see this on like most mobile operating systems. If you have like a do not disturb feature, it'll have the option like if someone calls, 4 times, or if it's this contact, let it come through, kind of thing. And so all of this turns out to be pretty important because we do read into these systems a lot. So every little piece of feedback, every little cue matters in these systems. And it has an actual effect on people's relationships with each other. Another idea and an interesting thing that people in romantic relationships specifically do is they will switch between apps or what we'll call communication channels. And so, you might be just using iMessage, and then you switch to Messenger, or then you switch to a video chat, or you switch to a phone call, something like that. And so there's kind of this question of, why people would do this, and does it have any benefits, and how does it play into the idea of having maybe just like one messaging app to rule them all, kind of thing. And so there are some benefits. So specifically, when couples are fighting, it turns out that they switch between modalities, and oftentimes that's kind of a reset, or in some cases it just allows a different perspective to be taken. If one application offers certain mechanisms to communicate, obviously that helps. So, sometimes people will be sending things through text, and it gets to a heated moment, and then they're on the phone talking to the other person after that, that kind of thing. But it's also used just to avoid conflict escalation, and just to help manage emotions, which is interesting. And so this study, followed quite a few people and had them monitored how they switch between these apps, looking at that. Now, an expansion of that is kind of this interesting idea of having topics within a single app. And I don't know if we see this really in any of our personal messaging apps. If you use something like Slack, for instance, to communicate with a team, and that's usually used in a work environment, you have channels within that. And so everyone's there in these channels, but you can have dedicated channels for certain content. And so there's work looking at doing this for, in this case, couples, and allowing them to have kind of multiple channels. So this is kind of alleviating the need for like a million different apps or different things. If you want to have like a shared grocery list or something, versus a conversation about something more immediate, or a conversation where you're just sharing funny memes that you think the other one might like. It turns out beneficial. So there's some interesting quotes in this one, but the one that I thought was most interesting is some people were saying, I can never tell, if I'm, annoying my significant other by, sharing too much just random stuff or whatever. And so they started to use these topics, basically to have a topic of things that were like not super important, but that they could, maybe look at when they had more free time versus things that were more important. And so it's also really useful in terms of organizing content, and we'll get as we go into the kind of the last part of our lecture today, we'll talk about why it might be important to have a good grasp of where content related to your relationship is. And So this overall was a really interesting thing, and I personally haven't seen it implemented on any commercial apps that are popular. Has anybody seen this kind of idea for individuals communicating? Slack was the best example I could think of, really. I don't know if, yeah. So it's kind of interesting, and maybe we'll see this used at some point. So another big area for interpersonal relationships, and probably the area with the most HCI content, is supporting long-distance relationships. Relationships where a partner is apart from the other partner by physical distance. And so one of the basic ones is video co-watching. Has anybody done this? I've tried it, yeah. Okay. So this is a popular commercial service that allows you to do this. So the idea being, you're in one location, the other person's in some faraway location. You're both going to watch the same video at the same time. Watch Netflix together, watch Hulu together, whatever, and have the ability to have a conversation with each other. You're kind of trying to mimic the idea of being together and consuming some content. So there's been some work in the CHI conference, way back, detailing this before this commercial system existed. And so they go through a sketching process, and they did some stuff with users to validate this. But it's something that people use on a regular basis now. So it's nice. Okay. Here's one that is kind of interesting, okay? And we'll watch this video. This is the idea of sharing a robotic pet in a long-distance relationship. So you're like caring for this pet together, but you're separated. So let me see if this will play. Not there. So it's kind of interesting, right? It's like the future of music piracy, maybe. I don't know. But what's kind of interesting about this Furby in a box that is, being cared for by two people. So there's a Chi paper on it, but this is actually just one person designed this, and they document their whole design process and this 200-day evaluation. And it's kind of refreshing, and a lot of Kai papers are like this, where you can read kind of this full design process, which is really nice. So like from the sketching through different iterations, different problems they encountered. And so this is also unique because this is a single person doing the study. You know, it's just, well, it's, you know, two people in the relationship, but it's just the author of this paper kind of presenting their own experiences with something they built. And so there are a lot of other systems similar to this kind of idea, and the whole idea being just to have this technology that's connecting two people. So touch over distance is a huge thing in terms of long distance technologies. A lot of them are about touch. So this is just another system, and this is essentially an array of little vibration motors, and then there's a sensing pad, and so whatever gesture or motion you make on one side will play out on the other side, and people can use this while they're talking to each other, that kind of thing. But it's meant to just kind of bring a haptic channel to remote communication, and we see this a lot. And so this is a Kai paper as well, and it takes you through their whole sketch design process. And if you think that Furby in a box was weird, I've got something wonderful for you. Here we go.
So this is Kiss Messenger, or Kissinger for short. This device here has pressure sensors to measure the pressure from your lips.
So you can experience the pressure of a simultaneous bidirectional snog.
Yes, that's right, yes. But through the internet.
Amazing.
You can be separated by thousands of kilometers and kiss each other.
Kissinger is a great way to bond with parents and children when you're away at work overseas. We have high precision sensors that are embedded under the silicon lid to measure the dynamic forces in different parts of your lips during a kiss. And the device will get this data from your lips and send it to your phone, which will in turn transmit the data to your partner through the internet in real time. We also have miniature linear actuators that are used to produce the same lip pressure on your partner's lips, and your partner will be able to kiss you like a real-time kiss through the internet. You can have a video call with your partner and use Kissinger as a way to connect to your partner through the internet in an intimate way. Research has shown that touch is a very important interaction, especially for human relationships. And through the internet, you can only see or hear from your friends and families, but you can't really touch them. With Kissinger, you can actually have a video chat with your friends and families over the internet and kiss them at the same time. It's a great two-way interaction and it feels like a real kiss.
So that would have been a great example for conversing, instead of instructing a system. It's a two-way interaction. So this actually did originate as a Kai paper, and now I think you can buy this thing. Maybe it's just on Kickstarter. I don't know. I've got a link in there if you're interested. But again, this is a bizarre thing, but it's transmitting touch. It's transmitting actuation in one place to another, trying to facilitate relationships that way. And with that said, let's go ahead and just move to breakups. So sadly, everything comes to an end. And so it turns out that the role of technology in breakups is of increasing importance. So one of the primary things, and we didn't talk too much about social media, social networks, which are part of relationships. The part that they tend to play is communicating status about the relationship to the outside world. And so this is a big deal when you want to indicate to the outside world that a romantic relationship that you were in has ended. You can, if you look at the history of kind of like Facebook and the way that they've handled this, it's evolved quite a bit over the years. I think most recently, when you go in Facebook, if you've had your status as in a relationship with someone and you change that to no longer be in a relationship with them, Facebook is going to offer immediately to mute them from your timeline feed so that you don't have to look at them in their potentially happier new life without you for a while. But it turns out that this is pretty important because when we designed these social network systems, we had this idea of you're either a friend or not a friend. It's this binary construct. That's not really how it works when a romantic relationship ends. It turns out that a lot of romantic partners still want to be able to check in maybe on their previous partner to see that they're doing okay or if they're in need of help. But most of them would not really like to be forced to see them on a regular basis. And so this is something that we have to think about when we design these systems. So in general, systems that connect people and facilitate relationships tend to be very positive. They're very motivated to get people on board into the system, using the system, connected to each other, but they don't really think about the end of these things. And that makes sense from a business perspective a lot. You want people on your platform using it in a positive way. But it can have a lot of negative effects. How many of you use something that tries to give you this like AI-generated set of memories at some point, like, oh, you have a new moment in photos, or yeah. And so it's like, it's an algorithm that's going through all of the content you've put into a specific application and trying to give you something, interesting or novel to look at, to, reflect back on the past year or whatever with this person. It's not so great to get that when you've, just broken up with that person after a long time. We see this in other areas, not just in close, intimate, romantic relationships. We see this with people, getting the Facebook thing about like, this day 2 years ago, your dog went missing, and you put this flyer. Okay, and the dog's gone, and that's not pleasant. No one wants to remember that. So it's a problem. And you'll see in most modern systems now, they have options like hide this memory, or don't do this again, please. And we're getting there, but it's not perfect. And so this is a big deal. Another issue are joint digital possessions or assets that get developed in relationships. And so this can be, simple things like pictures and media, things like that, but also access to resources. So a lot of us will share Netflix accounts, Hulu accounts, things like that. And then, it's kind of this this problem of, now that we've broken up and we had this Netflix account that we used as a couple for like 4 years, well, who gets the account? And, there's no way, both of us like these things, and it would be nice if Netflix, knew when we went our separate ways. Could we just copy that data? Oh, you can't, okay? So these are things to think about. While the user may not want to actively look at these possessions that were generated during a relationship, they may need a way to kind of transport them somewhere, or put them away in a safe place, or use them in the case of you've got to make your own Netflix account now and you would like it to know something about you. Maybe you could just import your previous data or something like that. So digital possessions become this big thing, and when we look at the darker side of things, we start to be concerned about, who has what photos of someone, and how are those secured, and can we remove access from that. This also comes up when we were talking about the different topics and knowing kind of where content is. So it turns out when a lot of studies of people who have been in intimate relationships and then they terminate the relationship, that they don't have an awareness of what accounts they shared, what shared resources they have, that their calendar is still shared. There's no central clearinghouse for that. I've noticed that things like if you share your location with someone, so like Google Maps, at least, if you use Google location sharing, it'll send you an email like once a month or something. It'll be like, hey, you're sharing your location with whoever. So that's probably a nice reminder if whoever is not someone you want to share your location with anymore. But other services, like I think Apple's Find Friends, I don't think it's ever asked me, in years of sharing, like, hey, you're sharing it. Certainly it'll say like, hey, this app is using your location, but Find Friends seems kind of immune to that. So there are concerns like that. And then we can certainly, maybe we'll have a class where we get into the darker kind of cybercrime and stalking stuff and how HCI relates to that. But there are a lot of concerns with this. And so these are issues of human-computer interaction because the user needs to know where their data is. They need to know how they're connected to someone. And so these are really interesting questions. And also, in terms of people use these tools or use these mediums, these technologies we've developed to make relationships better, they also go to these tools when they're exiting a romantic relationship for social support. So it's a big part of it. And so it turns out that people will give, for instance, on Facebook, a lot of social support to someone who's just broken up with someone. But originally, Facebook didn't really understand that, and so that would make it into your top stories or something as a memory, and so that would be represented to you, kind of later, and it was detrimental, obviously. So how we configure a system to let people communicate. It turns out people would prefer it if when friends were consoling them for a breakup, if that were not posted so publicly or on, something that's going to resurface easily later. But that's things that the designer has to think about. So they have to think about the full life cycle of the thing that they're supporting, in this case, romantic relationships. One other interesting thing about digital possessions, this is a website called brokenships.com, so you should check that out. It's a collection of physical and digital artifacts from, broken relationships, and so you can just submit them, and there's a map you can go. There's no one in Mississippi who's submitted anything yet, so if you have recently exited a relationship and you are feeling like, contribute, get us on the map there. But this is also related to the CHI conference. So they had, I think at last year's CHI, one of the installations of this, they had physical artifacts and digital artifacts, kind of trying to communicate this idea, of what people do with these things once they're finished with a relationship. Okay, so now the last category that we will go to will be HCI and sex. So I'm going to just go ahead and start you with, this is very recent, within the past week. So here we go.
Sex.
That's a really weird way to start off.
I'm just stalling right now, hoping she's in the mood for some horizontal hustle.
And I'm just waiting for him to make the first move so we can do the mattress mambo.
I love her.
And I love him.
I'm just not always sure she's ready to do some dancing in the sheets when I am. I've been shut down before. It's kind of embarrassing.
Alright, now I'm all sweaty. Me too. Eventually, it leads us to stop trying as often. Well, you're in luck because there's Love Sync.
LoveSync is a device that lets you know when both of you are in the mood for some hippity-dippity.
It's super simple. All you have to do is place a button at each of your bedsides, and when you're feeling a little randy, you just anonymously push the button. There's no risk of rejection. If only one of you pushes the button, nothing happens, and your partner's none the wiser. But if your partner's also ready for a pants-off dance-off, they'll press their button. The LoveSync technology combines these anonymous inputs and recognizes that there is consensus. It lets you both know by emitting a swirling glow from the buttons. Pressing the button multiple times sets a longer time period that you'd be down for bopping squiddles.
Rumpus humpus.
Hack in the sack.
2-person push-ups?
It's amazing for those times where you wouldn't mind being surprised in the middle of the night.
Which I avoided in the past, fear of waking the beast.
We surveyed couples across the globe, and over 50% said they would initiate more often if they knew they wouldn't be rejected by their partner. LoveSync is perfect for partners because it alleviates sexual frustration.
Now you'll always know when you and your significant other are ready for sexy time.
So if you think LoveSync can help you, why not try it?
Back us today and get your LoveSync on.
So, head on over to Kickstarter. I think it's like $44 or something if you back it now, but later it's going to cost more. So this is an interesting thing, right? Like this is kind of odd. Is this good or bad? Because we might look at this and think people in an intimate romantic relationship should probably be able to communicate directly about this kind of thing. Without the need for a ridiculous piece of hardware here that you anonymously tap to indicate, yeah.
So let's just prevent the partner from pressing your button.
I know, right? Just hit both of them and you're good to go. Yeah, I am not sure. Why is it not an app? Yeah, so they have, that is a frequently asked question on their Kickstarter, which I encourage you to all go there and just take it in. But I think their answer was like that they needed the physical embodiment of this button or something. It was nonsense. Yeah, and I would say if you want to do this, there are cheaper ways. So you could just get the Amazon Echo buttons. They're like $20 for 2 of them, and you could easily write an Alexa skill that would do this.
Or you could just talk to your partner.
You could just talk to them, yeah. Or I don't know. Maybe you even just like a sticky note or something if you want to. There are a lot of ways you can do this. Wake up in the morning and have on the fridge. Yes. 6 p.m. tonight. So maybe this is technology in search of a problem. Maybe it's just looking to profit off of this kind of craziness. But we see products like this being developed, trying to be a positive thing for relationships. And I should say, this is the only example that I'm going to show in regards to HCI and sex. And if you go into HCI literature, you will not find a lot about HCI and sex. And obviously, HCI and sex is something you should find a lot about because there are a lot of devices on the market that are intended for sexual uses. And these devices are more and more connected between people. They're using apps to control things. But it's not something that's really talked about a lot in HCI research. At the CHI conference, there is a workshop about it, but publications rarely make it to the main conference. And there are a lot of political reasons kind of for that. I'll tell you on the robotics side of things, we have recently had to deal with this call to ban sex robots. So people have, circulated a petition to ban killer robots for the military. Well, there's also one for sex robots. So there are two dueling sides of academics fighting each other about how robots can be used for sex. And these are valid, HCI or HRI questions. How can these things be helpful to people? I should also say there is a little bit of research on virtual reality and sex and pornography within VR. So that's interesting to look at. But there are a lot of concerns. And the concerns that tend to get elevated are the same concerns that are the ones that, we're worried about the children who are sexting, we're worried about all of these horrible things. While there are usually positive aspects to these things, there are reasons that you would want to promote healthy sexual behavior, and there are reasons that that's going to involve technology more and more. And so I think one of the few full CHI papers that was published about specifically sex and HCI was looking at the differences between the people who are the designers and developers of devices that are intended for sexual use and the people who are the developers and designers for HCI kind of systems, and the divide there and how they work. And there wasn't a lot of overlap between them. And we see this too in robotics, I should say. The people who are developing the, I guess, more and more advanced sex robots, which are essentially sex dolls being augmented with sensors and actuators and apps and AI. None of them are really connected with all of the other people who are developing, the thing that talks to children or Alexa or whoever. They're separate groups. And so kind of the industry that develops sex products is separated still. That's changing, and especially as there's more and more of a need for people who understand interacting with machines, and as these devices become more complicated, and certainly as they become more connected and we start to worry about the privacy and security of some of these devices, which you can also go read about. So the takeaway here, I think, is that when you're designing or looking at a domain that's something sensitive like this, so this sometimes is referred to as sensitive HCI or topics in sensitive HCI, there's a real question about the harm or the good that a system is doing. So a system like this, is it harmful or helpful? I don't know. Hopefully not that many people will use it, and so it won't really matter. But there are certainly arguments on both sides of this. And so that kind of gives us some reason and some merit to spend some time on social psychology, to spend some time looking at people and their relationships, and trying to understand specifically how the technology is going to change or alter that. And this is important. If for no other reason, you can look to things that are more established. So there's a lot of literature on just like Facebook, for instance. What does Facebook do to social relationships? And the consensus from articles that are not written by Facebook is that it's damaging in most cases. Not, we shouldn't just take that as a uniform statement that's true, but there's specific ways in specific circumstances that it can be very harmful. Just the interaction patterns that are there. And from time to time, when certain things are identified, Facebook does decide to intervene and alter that pattern and make things better for users. But something like Facebook is widely adopted, right? It's used by a lot of people. So it matters a lot how it's impacting those people, how it's supporting those people. The same applies for products like this, but products like this also have a little bit of a barrier or a stigma to study them. People are not usually as willing to just kind of shout out their experiences with different devices that are meant for sexual wellness. And so it can be difficult to find user groups, to conduct these studies, and to actually know if something is good or bad. Like I guarantee you the 50% of people they surveyed or whatever was not done in a rigorous way. You know, it was probably convincing a certain amount of people to check a certain thing on a box on the survey to say that this is a wonderful idea. So there's a lot of merit in looking at these things in a serious scientific sense and in a serious design sense. So that's what I have today about love and HCI. I hope that was insightful. I would encourage you to go out there and find more interesting love and HCI products and software. So next time we meet, we'll be doing our presentations for FedEx. So please remember to submit them on Tuesday before 11 a.m. so we can get them all sorted and ready to go. And just let me know if you have any questions before then. Otherwise, I'll see you Tuesday.
So you want us to go do that research and then put up a PowerPoint presentation for Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, you know, keep people awake every now and then.